Professor Lee Nam-Yong's editorial, long, "The construction of the Gangbuk cross-line light rail is urgently needed to guarantee mobility rights for the transportation vulnerable and to revitalize the economy of Northwestern Seoul, the essence of the problem and structural diagnosis." Seoul is a megacity with a population of approximately 9.4 million, and the greater metropolitan area is home to about 26 million people, making it one of the world's largest urban regions. However, the density and accessibility of transportation infrastructure reveals severe disparities between regions. The Gangnam area maintains an average commuting time of around 50 minutes through multiple overlapping subway lines, including lines 2, 3, 7, and 9, as well as the Shinbundang line. In contrast, the northwestern districts, Yunpyeong-gu, Seodaemun-gu, and northern Jongno-gu, suffer from weak east-west rail connectivity, and many areas experience average commuting times exceeding 60 minutes. This is not merely an issue of inconvenience, but one of unequal opportunity. I argue that this issue must be diagnosed not through emotion, but through data and structural analysis. According to Seoul Metropolitan Government statistics, the proportion of elderly residents in Seoul stands at approximately 21%, while certain areas in the northwest exceed 23%. The registered disabled population in Seoul totals approximately 390,000, and a significant portion of them heavily depend on public transportation. The mobility rights of transportation vulnerable groups are not a matter of choice, but a constitutional fundamental right. Areas with poor public transportation accessibility simultaneously suffer from reduced access to medical services, employment opportunities, and cultural facilities. Gaps in mobility inevitably lead to income and asset disparities. Therefore, the Gangbuk Cross-Line Light Rail is not merely a transportation policy, but also a social and economic policy. Identification of stakeholders and relational analysis. I first identify the stakeholders. The primary stakeholders are the transportation vulnerable, including the elderly, persons with disabilities, pregnant women, and youth. The secondary stakeholders include commuting workers, the self-employed, and small business owners. The Seoul Metropolitan Government, relevant district governments, and central government agencies such as the Ministry of Economy and Finance and the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport are institutional stakeholders responsible for policy execution. Financial institutions and private investors are also stakeholders in financing. Only through structural analysis of the relationships among these actors can the true substance of the policy be revealed. Transportation networks not only reduce travel time, but also influence commercial dwell time and consumption conversion rates. Case studies from major global cities indicate that retail sales within a 500-meter radius of light rail stations increase by more than 10% on average. This demonstrates that transportation infrastructure functions not merely as a means of conveyance, but as a platform for economic revitalization. Commercial districts in northwestern Seoul rely heavily on floating populations, characterized by short dwell times and low consumption conversion rates. The establishment of a cross-city rail corridor would diversify movement patterns and distribute consumption more evenly. Relationships among stakeholders would shift from competition to coexistence. Domestic and international legal frameworks and global standards. The Constitution of the Republic of Korea guarantees human dignity, value, and the pursuit of happiness. The Act on Promotion of the Transportation Convenience of Mobility. Disadvantaged persons imposes obligations on the state and local governments to guarantee mobility rights. The Act on the Prohibition of Discrimination against Persons with Disabilities and Remedy against Infringement of Their Rights also explicitly ensures accessibility rights. Internationally, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognizes freedom of movement as a fundamental right. Global standards increasingly regard transportation as a matter of welfare and human rights. When comparing rail network density across OECD cities, Seoul demonstrates strong radial connectivity but relatively weak cross-city connectivity. Paris and Tokyo have continuously expanded circular and cross-city lines to enhance the resilience of their transportation networks, ensuring alternative routes in case of disruption on a single line. In contrast, northwestern Seoul currently has limited alternative routes and remains heavily dependent on buses. This constitutes a structural risk factor for transportation vulnerable groups. Therefore, the Gangbuk cross-line light rail represents a strategy to complete the network in alignment with global standards. Economic feasibility and statistical approach. The benefit-cost ratio used in preliminary feasibility studies serves as a key criterion in policy decision-making. Generally, a BC ratio of 1.0 or higher indicates economic feasibility. However, the benefits to vulnerable groups and environmental gains tend to be undervalued. A reduction of 10 minutes in commuting time is estimated to generate annual productivity gains of several $100,000 per individual. Applied to hundreds of thousands of commuters in Northwestern Seoul, this translates into social benefits amounting to tens of billions of won annually. This value far exceeds simple transportation demand metrics. Property value appreciation and tax revenue expansion must also be considered. The formation of station areas increases official land values and expands commercial facilities, thereby enlarging local tax revenues. Seoul's fiscal scale amounts to approximately 50 trillion won, and urban railway construction should be viewed as a long-term strategy for strengthening the tax base. From an environmental perspective, reduced private vehicle usage lowers carbon emissions. The transportation sector accounts for roughly 20% of Seoul's greenhouse gas emissions. Expanding light rail infrastructure directly contributes to carbon neutrality strategies. FEA-based administrative and systemic approach. I assert that this project must be approached from a federal enterprise architecture perspective. The business area should integrate transportation infrastructure with social welfare and economic revitalization. The line of business must be subdivided into railway construction, operation and maintenance, station area development, and financing mechanisms. At the subfunction level, route design, safety management, smart control systems, and transfer network integration must be included. Such systematic structuring prevents policy overlap and omission. An engineering approach is also essential. Light rail systems require lower construction costs than heavy rail and have smaller turning radii, making them suitable for dense urban environments. A mixed design of underground and elevated sections can optimize costs. The adoption of smart signaling systems and automated operations reduces operating expenses. Route prioritization must be determined scientifically through data-driven demand forecasting and analytic hierarchy process analysis. Administration must be guided not by intuition but by algorithms and data. Financing and policy implementation strategy. Financing can combine local government funds, national subsidies, and private investment models. Phased implementation within the scope of the Urban Rail Transit Act and the Local Finance Act is feasible. Strategically launching an initial segment to create a successful precedent before expansion is a realistic approach. Linking the project to the central government's balanced national development strategy strengthens its policy legitimacy. Guaranteeing mobility rights for vulnerable populations also produces long-term welfare budget savings. Building public consensus is essential for policy implementation. Transparency must be ensured through stakeholder briefings and open data disclosure. Performance indicators should include reductions in commuting time, decreases in transfer time, increases in station area sales, and satisfaction levels among vulnerable users. Quantitative KPIs must evaluate policy success. I maintain that policy is not a declaration, but an object of measurement and evaluation. Ultimately, the transportation gap in Northwestern Seoul is a structural issue that encompasses both mobility rights and economic vitality. The Gangbuk Cross-Line Light Rail is not merely a transportation project, but a strategy to redesign the city's structure. Global standards, domestic and international legal frameworks, and statistical evidence support the legitimacy of this initiative. Relationships among stakeholders must be redefined toward a structure of coexistence and shared growth. I believe that now is the time for decisive action. Honest citizens must make judgments based on accurate information and data. What is required is not emotional rhetoric, but structural diagnosis and scientific prescription. The Gangbuk Cross-Line Light Rail is a core infrastructure that guarantees mobility rights for the transportation vulnerable, revitalizes the local economy, and strengthens the city's future competitiveness. I am convinced that this project will unlock the latent potential of Northwestern Seoul. Thank you for watching Professor Lee Nam-Yong's editorial, Long.